Tonight, let us wander back to the banks of the Mekong, where the humid air of Southeast Asia carried the scent of lotus blossoms and wet earth. In the twilight, the slow rhythm of ox carts creaking along dirt paths echoed against the distant silhouettes of temple towers, their spires rising like fingers toward the heavens. Here lay the heart of an empire once among the most radiant of the medieval world, the Khmer. Imagine a fisherman casting his net into the Tonlé Sap as the monsoon clouds gathered on the horizon, or a young girl lighting a small clay lamp at dusk before a carved image of Vishnu. These were not kings or generals, but ordinary people whose lives formed the silent foundation of grandeur. While the chronicles often record the names of monarchs Jayavarman, Suryavarman, it was the patient labor of peasants, artisans, and monks that transformed marshland into kingdoms and jungles into sacred stone. The Khmer Empire rose from a land where water was both gift and tyrant. The annual floods of the Great Lake fed endless rice fields, making possible a population large enough to build wonders like Angkor Wat. At night, under a sky crowded with stars, travelers on the royal roads could hear chants drifting from monasteries, blending with the rustle of palm trees. It was a civilization of rhythm, season, and ritual, birth and decay, glory and decline. Yet, like the rivers that nourished them, the Khmer flowed toward both creation and dissolution. Their temples still stand, weathered yet unyielding, reminders of an age when faith carved itself into stone. But where there is rise, there is fall. And so tonight, as you drift into slumber, let us walk slowly through the entire history of the Khmer Empire, its dawn, its triumphs, its long twilight, and listen to the whispers left behind in the jungle's embrace. Before, there were kings and stone temples. There was only the land, a vast, fertile plain stretched between mountains and sea, carved by the great arteries of the Mekong and Tonlé Sap. The Khmer world began not with conquest, but with water. Each year, the monsoon rains swelled the rivers until they spilled over their banks, drowning the lowlands and filling the lake until it became an inland sea. Then, as the waters receded, they left behind dark, rich soil, a gift for rice, the grain that became both food and faith. Picture a small village centuries before Angkor. Built from bamboo and palm leaves, chickens scratch at the ground. Children wade through the shallows, chasing fish. And elders gather beneath thatched roofs to tell stories of Nagas, the serpent spirits said to guard the rivers. For the Khmer, the river was not only sustenance, but a sacred bond. In myths passed down through generations, their first king was said to have married a Naga princess, binding people and water forever. It was in this landscape that the earliest Khmer communities flourished. Archaeologists uncover traces of irrigation canals, shards of pottery, and stone beads that hint at trade reaching far beyond the jungle. The influence of India flowed in with merchants and monks carrying Hindu epics, Sanskrit scripts, and the gentle presence of Buddhism. The Mekong, once only a lifeline for fishing and farming, became a highway of culture, carrying stories, deities, and ideas that would soon root themselves deep into Khmer soil. The first organized realms, such as Funan and Chenla, rose from this mingling of river wealth and foreign influence. Funan's rulers controlled ports along the Gulf of Thailand, trading spices, ivory, and forest products with distant lands. Chenla, to the north, turned inward, building networks of canals and cultivating rice to feed growing populations. From these foundations, the Khmer identity began to crystallize not just as farmers of rice, but as builders of kingdoms. Imagine a dusk gathering at an early shrine, where oil lamps flicker against carvings of Vishnu reclining on the serpent Ananta. The villagers whisper prayers for rain, for harvest, for protection from the jungle's perils. Behind them, in the darkness, the forest waits its canopy alive with cicadas, its shadows hiding elephants and tigers. To live in this land was to balance reverence with survival, to carve order out of a landscape that seemed both bountiful and threatening. As centuries passed, the Khmer learned to master their environment with canals and reservoirs, an achievement that would later allow Angkor to flourish. But here, in these beginnings, there was a simplicity, villages strung along rivers, rice planted in rhythm with floods, temples rising modestly in wood and brick. The grandeur of Angkor Wat was still far away, but the spirit of Khmer civilization, the union of water, faith, and endurance was already alive. For now, the Khmer remained a people of beginnings, sowing seeds in fertile mud, guided by myths of serpents and kings. In the quiet of night, their world seemed eternal, as though the rivers would always rise and fall, and the stars would always shine over Tonlé Sap. Yet history, like water, is never still. What began in these riverside villages would one day swell into an empire whose monuments still speak across centuries. Before the grandeur of Angkor, there were older names, Funan and Chenla kingdoms, that linger like half-remembered dreams at the edge of history. They were the prologue to the empire, early experiments in power and culture that planted the seeds of Khmer civilization. Their remains lie scattered in riverbeds, brick mounds, and Sanskrit inscriptions, whispering of a time when the Mekong basin first connected to the wider world. Funan, according to Chinese chronicles, was born near the delta, where ships could slip easily into the Gulf of Thailand and beyond. To the Chinese envoys who sailed upriver, Funan was a marvel of trade markets crowded with ivory, sandalwood, cardamom, and gems mined from jungle hills. From India came saffron-robed monks and Brahmins with sacred texts, their chants filling the air of wooden shrines. From the west arrived merchants bearing Roman coins, proof that even distant empires brushed against the Khmer shore. The legend says that Funan's first king, Kaundinya, was an Indian Brahmin who came by sea and married a serpent princess, a Naga who ruled the waters. In this story lies more than myth. It is the memory of a people whose power came from uniting the river's gifts with ideas carried on the tide. The Naga princess, her coils hidden in the deep, symbolized the land itself, wild, fertile, and dangerous, tamed only when bound to a new vision of kingship. Yet kingdoms, like rivers, shift. By the 7th century, Funan waned, and Chenla rose in its place. Unlike its predecessor, Chenla turned inward, away from the ports and trade winds, toward the rice fields and canals. Its rulers carved their names in Sanskrit stone, claiming descent from Hindu gods, while their people built villages linked by waterways and reservoirs. The jungle thickened around them, but within the clearings, temples in brick and laterite began to rise, modest precursors of the stone wonders yet to come. Imagine the rhythm of life in Chenla mornings, beginning with drums at a shrine, farmers wading knee-deep in flooded paddies, traders guiding boats laden with rice along canals. At dusk, a procession winds toward a temple, torches flickering as priests scatter flowers before an image of Shiva. The kingdom was not vast, but its heartbeat was steady, grounded in the rhythm of harvests and rituals. Still, Chenla was not untouched by conflict. The Chinese annals speak of land Chenla and water Chenla, perhaps rival realms divided by geography and ambition. Wars flickered along borders, leaving behind ruins of fortifications and abandoned sanctuaries. But even through discord, the Khmer skill at managing water deepened. They learned that to rule in this land was to command not only men, but rivers, an art that would soon support populations counted in the hundreds of thousands. From Funan's ports to Chenla's canals, a transformation unfolded. The Khmer were no longer simply villagers in bamboo huts, they were builders of temples, carvers of stone, followers of kings who claimed divine right. The blend of Hindu cosmology and local animist traditions gave birth to a spiritual vision where the king stood as both ruler and sacred center, a living axis between heaven and earth. By the 8th century, Chenla too began to fracture, its unity washed away by the tide of history. Yet out of this fading kingdom emerged the stage for a new order. From the north and west, a dynasty would rise that would carve forests into avenues, lakes into reservoirs, and sandstone into towers that kissed the sky. This would be Angkor, the radiant capital of the Khmer Empire. As night falls on these early centuries, we see the outline of what was to come: the fishermen of Funan, the rice farmers of Chenla, the priests chanting in Sanskrit. All were threads in a tapestry that would one day stretch across Southeast Asia. Their stories remind us that empires are not born in a moment, but grow slowly, like rivers swelling with rain, until they overflow their banks and change the world. Every civilization has a moment when scattered fragments unite into a vision, when the land itself seems to choose a ruler. For the Khmer, that moment came in the early 9th century, with a man named Jayavarman II. Before him, the Mekong basin was a quilt of small kingdoms, each with its own chieftains, temples, and ambitions. After him, there was Angkor, a single heart beating in the jungle, an empire destined for glory. Jayavarman II's early life remains veiled in legend. Some chronicles suggest he spent years at the Javanese court, learning statecraft from the maritime powers of Southeast Asia. Whether true or not, when he returned to the Cambodian plains, he carried with him more than experience, he carried a vision. In 802 CE, atop the holy mountain of Phnom Penh, he declared himself Chakravartin, a universal monarch, one who ruled by divine mandate. The ceremony was more than politics, it was ritual, binding the Khmer king to the gods in an eternal covenant. Imagine the scene: priests chanting Vedic hymns, smoke from burning sandalwood curling into the humid air, warriors kneeling with spears planted firmly in the soil. In that moment, Jayavarman was not merely a man, but a living axis between heaven and earth, embodying Shiva, presiding over a land now consecrated as a single realm. The people who knelt before him may not have understood the full grandeur of the proclamation, but they felt its weight, the dawn of something greater than their villages, their canals, their fields. From this act flowed the birth of Angkor. Jayavarman II chose the northern plains near Tonlé Sap as his base, a land of fertile rice fields and abundant water. Here he began to consolidate villages, erect shrines, and dig reservoirs. Though his temples were modest compared to what would come, they were the first strokes on a canvas destined to become a masterpiece. His successors would carry the vision further, transforming forests into avenues, swamps into moats, and sandstone into towers. The genius of Jayavarman's legacy lay not only in kingship, but in geography. By situating power near Tonlé Sap, he tapped into the natural engine of Khmer civilization. The lake, swelling with monsoon floods, became a reservoir that could feed armies and builders alike. Water was no longer just sustenance, it was power. Harnessed through canals and barrages, great man-made lakes that shimmered under the tropical sun. Daily life under Jayavarman remained humble for most. Farmers bent over in rice paddies. Monks tended shrines in quiet devotion. Women wove silk beneath stilted houses. Yet all felt the ripple of change. Tribute flowed upward. Labor was summoned for public works, and whispers of a new capital filled the air. The people may have known little of Chakravartin or Sanskrit hymns, but they saw with their own eyes the transformation of their land into something enduring. Jayavarman II died sometime in the mid-9th century, leaving behind not a completed empire, but a foundation, an idea planted in soil and stone. He was the spark, not the flame. Yet in history, sparks matter most. His successors, such as Indravarman and Yasovarman, would take that vision and raise it into monumental reality. They would give us Angkor, a city of wonder, born from the ambition of a king who once stood on Phnom Penh and claimed the world. As we leave this chapter, imagine night descending on the mountain where he proclaimed his divine right. The jungle hums with cicadas, the sky above thick with stars. The priests' fires have burned low, but the words spoken there still echo. The Khmer are one, their king is universal, and their destiny stretches far beyond the horizon. After Jayavarman II lit the first flame of kingship, his successors nurtured it into a steady fire. By the late 9th century, the Khmer world was no longer a loose gathering of chieftains, but a kingdom with ambition written in earth and stone. Among its early builders, none left a mark as enduring as Yasovarman I, the king who founded Angkor as the true heart of empire. Yasovarman came to power in 889 CE, inheriting the throne from his father, Indravarman I, where his father had dug reservoirs and raised temples in brick. Yasovarman dreamed of a capital that would outshine all before it. He looked upon the fertile plains north of the Great Lake and envisioned a city not just for his reign, but for eternity. Thus began Yasodharapura, the first great Angkor. At its center rose a mountain temple, Phnom Penh, a pyramid of stone built upon a natural hill, crowned with towers meant to mirror the cosmic Mount Meru, the axis of the universe in Hindu cosmology. Imagine approaching it at dawn, the jungle mist clinging to the slopes, the towers glowing gold as the sun pierced the horizon, monks in saffron robes chanting softly at the base. For the Khmer, this was not mere architecture. It was cosmology carved in stone, a declaration that their king stood at the center of the world. But Yasovarman's vision extended beyond temples. He expanded the system of barais, massive reservoirs that glistened like inland seas. The East Baray alone stretched over 7 kilometers, a shimmering expanse of water that fed rice fields, sustained tens of thousands, and symbolized mastery over nature itself. To command water was to command life, and the Khmer became unrivaled engineers, bending rivers and rains into obedient servants of empire. Daily life in Angkor pulsed with this abundance. Rice harvests filled granaries. Markets bustled with goods from India and China. Elephants carried timbers through the forest. And artisans carved sandstone into lintels alive with dancing apsaras and coiling nagas. The city's streets echoed with 1,000 tongues, traders haggling, pilgrims chanting, children laughing as they splashed in canals. For the first time, Angkor was not just a capital, but a living world, home to nobles, farmers, monks, and wanderers alike. Yasovarman also strengthened religion's hold on Khmer identity. Shrines to Shiva and Vishnu multiplied, but so too did monasteries of Buddhism. Inscriptions tell of monks teaching in schools, of kings donating rice fields to temples, of villagers leaving offerings of flowers and rice before stone altars. The empire was not uniform in faith, but woven from many strands, each contributing to a fabric of devotion that bound heaven and earth. Yet, beneath the splendor, shadows lingered. The jungle pressed in, eager to reclaim what was built. Canals needed constant repair. Temples demanded endless labor, and rival chieftains still tested the edges of royal authority. Yasovarman's power was immense, but it rested on fragile foundations of loyalty and harvest. In a land where floods and droughts could tip the balance, stability was never guaranteed. Still, when night fell upon Angkor, the city glowed with torches reflected in the waters of the barais. Priests climbed Phnom Penh to light lamps at the summit, their flames flickering like stars above the jungle canopy. Travelers on distant roads could glimpse the glow and know they approached the center of a rising empire. By the time of his death, in 910 CE, Yasovarman had given the Khmer more than a capital. He had given them a vision of permanence, of a city aligned with the cosmos, nourished by water, guarded by gods. Though dynasties would shift, wars would come, and temples would crumble. The idea of Angkor as the eternal heart of Khmer identity was now unshakable. As you drift towards sleep, imagine standing at the top of Phnom Penh as the sun sets. the vast East Baray shimmering below, the jungle stretching endless in every direction. From this height, the empire seems timeless, as though it will never fade. Yet, as we know, time spares no kingdom. For the Khmer, the heights of glory were still ahead, but so too were the seeds of decline, already waiting, quietly, beneath the soil. Every civilization has a monument that captures its soul. For Egypt, it was the pyramids. For Rome, the Colosseum. For the Khmer, it was Angkor Wat, a temple so vast and intricate that it seemed less built than conjured. At its heart stood Suryavarman II, the king whose reign in the early 12th century lifted the Khmer Empire to its zenith. Suryavarman II ascended the throne around 1113 CE. In a time when Angkor's power stretched across much of mainland Southeast Asia, yet kingship in the Khmer world was never secure. It had to be claimed, defended, and sanctified. Legends tell of Suryavarman proving his strength in battle, slaying rivals, and ascending to the throne amid a storm of steel. But once enthroned, he turned his gaze to eternity. His vision took form in Angkor Wat, a temple that dwarfed all before it, dedicated to Vishnu, the preserver of the universe. It was conceived not only as a house of the gods, but as a cosmic diagram. 5 central towers rose like lotus buds, symbolizing the peaks of Mount Meru, the divine mountain. Galleries stretched with carvings of epics, armies of gods and demons churning the ocean of milk. Warriors marching in perfect file. Celestial dancers forever poised mid-step. Imagine walking toward the temple at dawn. A causeway of sandstone stretches before you, flanked by balustrades carved into nagas. The moat, wide as a river, mirrors the sky, its waters alive with lotus blossoms. As you cross, the first light of sunrise gilds the towers in gold, and the chants of monks roll through the air like waves. To step into Angkor Wat was to step into a universe both human and divine. But Angkor Wat was not only a temple, it was a statement of power. Its scale spoke of a kingdom able to command tens of thousands of laborers, artisans, and priests. Its symmetry and order reflected the king's claim to rule not only land but the cosmos itself. For the common people, their days bent toward its construction, quarrying sandstone, hauling blocks by elephant, carving endless bas-reliefs. For them, devotion was measured not in prayers alone, but in sweat and stone. Beyond Angkor Wat, Suryavarman's reign was marked by ambition. He sent armies westward toward the Chao Phraya Basin, southward toward the coasts, seeking tribute and obedience. Envoys traveled as far as China, carrying gifts of ivory and spices, returning with recognition of Khmer supremacy. For a moment, it seemed the empire's reach was limitless, its splendor unmatched, and yet glory always bears shadow. Angkor Wat, so magnificent, also revealed the strain beneath. Its scale demanded resources on a scale never seen before. Forests stripped, fields taxed, labourers driven. The king's ambition sowed whispers of unrest. Wars, though glorious in inscription, drained men and grain, even as the temple's towers rose. Cracks formed in the foundations of empire. Still, when the sun set over Angkor Wat, its stones glowed red against the darkening sky, and pilgrims lit oil lamps along its galleries. The bas-reliefs flickered with shadow, as if the gods themselves walked in the corridors. Travelers from distant lands marveled, recording its towers as wonders beyond imagination. To stand before Angkor Wat was to believe that the Khmer had indeed touched eternity. Suryavarman II died around 1150 CE. His ashes interred within the temple he had built. Angkor Wat became both his tomb and his testament, a bridge between mortal life and divine order. For centuries, its towers would outlast dynasties, wars, and invasions, standing as silent witness to the rise and fall of all who claimed Angkor's throne. As you drift towards sleep, picture yourself lying on the grass beyond the moat, gazing at the temple silhouetted against a star-filled sky. Fireflies hover in the humid air, and the faint sound of chanting drifts from within. You might believe, for a moment, that this monument will last forever, and perhaps it will. For though kingdoms fade, some stones carry whispers that outlive time itself. If Suryavarman II gave the Khmer their most radiant temple, then Jayavarman VII gave them their most relentless vision of empire. To his people, he was both savior and tyrant, a king whose energy seemed inexhaustible, whose ambition burned brighter than the sun above Angkor. He would lead the Khmer to their greatest expansion, but also strain the empire to its breaking point. Jayavarman's rise came through fire. In the mid-12th century, Angkor fell under attack by the Cham. Fierce seafarers from what is now central Vietnam, their fleets stormed the Mekong. Their warriors swept into Angkor itself, and for a moment the capital lay in enemy hands. Imagine the terror of that night, flames licking the thatched roofs, monks fleeing temples with sacred scrolls clutched to their chests, the cries of women and children mingling with the clang of steel. It was Jayavarman who rallied the Khmer. Returning from the provinces, he raised armies, summoned allies, and struck back with ferocity. In 1181, he drove the Cham from Angkor and reclaimed the city. The people hailed him as a liberator, a warrior blessed by the Buddha himself. Yet victory was not enough for Jayavarman. From this crucible of war, he emerged with a conviction: the empire must never again be so vulnerable. It must expand, dominate, and endure. And so began an age of relentless building. Jayavarman raised more monuments than any Khmer ruler before or after. Bayon, his state temple, rose at the center of Angkor, its towers carved with serene faces gazing in every direction. To walk among them was to feel watched, comforted, perhaps even judged by the all-seeing gaze of the king. Around Angkor, he ordered the construction of Ta Prohm and Prayer Khan, monasteries vast as small cities, dedicated not only to gods but to his parents. Their walls still stand, strangled by roots of giant trees, haunting reminders of devotion entangled with time. Jayavarman also built, for his people, roads stretched across the empire, lined with rest houses where weary travelers could find shelter. Hospitals, more than 100, were founded, offering care to the sick. He saw kingship as compassion in action, a duty to relieve suffering. His inscriptions proclaimed, "The pain of my people is my pain. Their happiness is my happiness." To his subjects, this blend of piety and paternalism seemed divine, yet compassion carried a heavy price. Every temple, every road, every hospital demanded labor. Thousands were conscripted, forests felled, fields drained of surplus. The empire's strength was bent toward service of the king's vision, for farmers bent over in the paddies, artisans chiseling stone until their hands bled, soldiers marching across distant frontiers. The burden was immense. Jayavarman's compassion was real, but so too was the weight of his ambition. Under his rule, the Khmer Empire reached its widest borders, stretching into Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam. Angkor was the center of a world bound together by conquest and roads. But the farther an empire stretches, the thinner its foundations become. Behind the grandeur of Bayon's smiling faces, cracks had already begun to form. Rival states waited at the borders. Restless laborers murmured in villages. Even the waters of Tonlé Sap seemed fickle, its floods less predictable, its soil less generous. As night falls over Bayon, picture the temple bathed in torchlight, the great faces glowing faintly in the flicker of flame. Pilgrims kneel, whispering prayers. Soldiers stand guard at the gates. The king himself, weary but unyielding, walks among his people, convinced that only endless building, endless conquest can secure eternity. But eternity is a fragile dream. The very monuments that seem to promise permanence would become the empire's burden. When Jayavarman died around 1218 CE, he left behind not only triumphs but debts, temples half-finished, fields overtaxed, an empire stretched thin. The Khmer had reached their zenith, yet from this height, the path could only slope downward. And so, the story turns. The jungle that once bowed to kings began to creep back. Enemies watched with hungry eyes. The waters that had sustained Angkor for centuries whispered change. The age of glory was ending, and the long twilight was about to begin. After the restless fire of Jayavarman VII, the empire stood vast, glittering, but exhausted. The smiling faces of Bayon gazed out over a land burdened by temples, canals, and wars. When the king's hand no longer guided them, the Khmer found themselves staring into a twilight that deepened slowly, decade by decade. The 13th century brought change both subtle and relentless. The people still walked the avenues of Angkor. Markets still overflowed with rice and fish, and pilgrims still knelt before Vishnu and the Buddha. Yet beneath the rhythm of daily life, something had shifted. The colossal projects of Jayavarman had drained the treasury, and fields once fertile began to falter. Tonlé Sap's floods grew less reliable, and the intricate network of canals and barrages needed constant care that fewer hands were willing or able to provide. Religion, too, shifted. Where once the Hindu gods had reigned in stone, now Buddhism carried on the soft voices of monks, seeped into the empire's soul. Jayavarman VII had embraced the compassionate path of the Buddha. But after his death, the pendulum swung back toward older traditions. Temples shifted purpose. Shrines to Vishnu replaced with statues of the Buddha, and then back again in cycles of devotion and decree. For the common people, these changes were confusing, but life went on. They lit lamps, offered rice, and whispered prayers, uncertain of which God would hear them next. Meanwhile, the empire's borders frayed. In the west, the rising Thai kingdoms of Sukhothai and Ayutthaya tested Khmer strength. In the east, the Cham and Vietnamese pressed in. Armies marched. Battles flared. But the Khmer were no longer invincible. Victories came at greater cost. Defeats left deeper scars. For villagers in the borderlands, war meant burning fields, abandoned shrines, and families scattered into the jungle. Angkor itself remained majestic. Imagine walking through its gates in this twilight age. The towers still gleamed, the moats still shimmered, and processions of monks still moved along the causeways. But in the shadows, walls cracked, reservoirs silted, and neglected temples lay half swallowed by roots. Travelers from China described an empire still splendid, yet clearly waning. One envoy wrote of a capital rich in rice and markets, but also of corruption, of peasants weary under burdensome taxes, of grandeur fading like a painting left too long in the sun. The people endured. In stilted houses along the canals, families wove baskets, fished at night with nets weighted by stone, and sang old songs of serpent kings and golden harvests. They carried on as they always had, even as dynasties quarreled and invaders pressed the borders. For them, the empire was not inscriptions or temples, but the rhythm of rice and rain. Yet even that rhythm faltered when floods failed or drought cracked the earth. By the 14th century, Angkor was still magnificent, but it no longer shone as the unchallenged center of Southeast Asia. Rival kingdoms grew stronger. Trade shifted toward coastal ports, and the jungle crept closer to the once ordered roads. Each season, more temples stood abandoned, their galleries echoing only with wind and bird call. Angkor was not falling in a single blow, it was sinking slowly, like a great stone barge settling into the marsh. As night settles on this chapter, picture the scene: a lone monk walking through the silent halls of Ta Prohm, his lamp casting flickers of light across walls tangled with roots. Outside, the jungle hums, reclaiming what kings had once claimed as eternal. The Khmer still lived, prayed, and dreamed, but their empire was no longer ascending. It was entering its long twilight, a dusk that would stretch for centuries until the stars of Angkor faded from the horizon. By the 14th century, Angkor was like an aging monarch still clothed in splendor, but its strength ebbing quietly away. The towers of Angkor Wat still reached toward the heavens. The faces of Bayon still smiled serenely, yet outside the walls, storms gathered. The Khmer Empire, once unrivaled, now faced foes who saw weakness in its grandeur. Chief among them was Ayutthaya, the rising Thai kingdom to the west. For decades, Khmer kings struggled to maintain their borders. Armies marched out from Angkor's gates. Elephants, armored in bronze, banners of Naga serpents flapping in the monsoon wind. But victory no longer came easily. The Thais were bold, resourceful, and unburdened by the weight of crumbling monuments. Battle after battle drained Khmer strength. Defeats left scars that even temples could not conceal. Life in Angkor during these years carried a strange duality. Within the city, markets still thrived. Traders sold fish from Tonlé Sap. Silks dyed in bright colors. Spices carried from distant forests. Monks continued their chants in candlelit shrines. To a traveler entering the city, Angkor might still have seemed eternal. Yet, beyond the moats, fields lay neglected, canals silted, and villages whispered of hunger. The empire's heart still beat, but faintly. Religious change deepened the uncertainty. Buddhism, especially the Theravada school spreading from Sri Lanka and Thailand, grew stronger among the people. Its quiet simplicity contrasted with the grand rituals of the Hindu kings. While earlier rulers had claimed divine status as god kings, the new faith spoke of humility, of impermanence, of letting go, to peasants weary of endless building and taxation. Its message was comforting, but to the royal cult, it was a challenge. The bond between king and god weakened, leaving kingship itself vulnerable. The decisive blow came in 1431, when the armies of Ayutthaya marched upon Angkor. Chronicles tell of flames rising against the night sky, of walls battered, of the capital overrun. Imagine the panic families fleeing along jungle paths, monks carrying relics in trembling hands, the once proud avenues choked with smoke and cries. Angkor, the city of temples, the jewel of the Mekong, fell to foreign hands. The victors carried away treasures, sacred statues, perhaps even entire communities. Though Angkor was not utterly abandoned in that moment, its prestige shattered. The Khmer court, battered and weakened, shifted southward toward Phnom Penh and other river ports, seeking survival in trade rather than in temples. The jungle, patient and unyielding, began its slow conquest of the abandoned monuments. Picture Ta Prohm in those years, once filled with chanting monks and fragrant incense. Now, silent, save for the creak of roots splitting stone, birds nested in galleries, vines wrapped around apsaras, and rainwater pooled in cracked courtyards. The grandeur that once spoke of eternity now whispered of impermanence. For villagers who still lived nearby, the temples were not dead, but transformed, haunted, sacred, part of the living forest. Yet, even in decline, Angkor left a mark. Its temples became pilgrimage sites, its legends carried in stories, its stone inscriptions preserved in memory to neighboring kingdoms. The Khmer were no longer conquerors, but their legacy lingered like a faded echo. Angkor had fallen, but it had not vanished. As dusk falls on this chapter, imagine walking through the silent ruins after the sack of 1431. The last smoke drifts into the night sky. The cries of battle fade, and only the jungle remains constant, its cicadas singing, its roots tightening their grip on stone. The Khmer people endure, scattered and transformed. But the empire they built has slipped into twilight. The city that once proclaimed itself eternal is now only a memory carried on the wind. The fall of Angkor did not mean the end of the Khmer people. Civilizations rarely vanish overnight. They transform like rivers changing course. After 1431, the Khmer court shifted southward, away from the jungle temples toward the banks of the Mekong and Tonlé Sap's southern reaches. The new centers, closer to the sea and the trade winds, reflected a different world, less monumental, more practical, but no less human. Phnom Penh, a modest settlement at the confluence of rivers, emerged as a new capital. Here, the waterways themselves became palace walls, and wooden halls replaced sandstone towers. The royal court adjusted to new realities. Survival no longer meant building cosmic mountains of stone, but navigating currents of commerce and diplomacy. Traders from China, Siam, and later even Europeans docked their ships along Khmer ports, exchanging porcelain, silk, and silver for rice, timber, and elephants. For ordinary people, life continued in familiar rhythms, though without the shadow of great temples rising above their villages. Farmers still planted rice, fishermen still cast nets in Tonlé Sap, and monks still walked barefoot at dawn to collect alms. Yet the grandeur of Angkor was replaced by a quieter resilience. Instead of chiseling apsaras into sandstone, artisans carved wood or wove silk. Instead of raising barrays, villagers dug smaller ponds to irrigate their fields. The scale was diminished, but the spirit endured. Religion, too, settled into new patterns. Theravada Buddhism, with its gentle emphasis on impermanence and personal salvation, spread deeply into Khmer society. The grand Hindu cult of Devaraja, the god-king, faded, leaving kings more human, less divine. In villages, temples became centers of teaching, meditation, and communal gathering. The chants of monks echoed not in vast stone galleries, but in simpler wooden halls. Yet their message that suffering passes, that compassion endures, sustained the Khmer through centuries of change. The memory of Angkor lingered, but as legend more than reality. Villagers spoke of the city of the gods, swallowed by the forest. Hunters told tales of spirits haunting the towers, of apsaras who danced in moonlight among ruins. Children, gazing at the jungle's silhouette, whispered that somewhere in the trees stood towers that touched the sky. Angkor became both myth and memory, a symbol of greatness lost yet not forgotten. Meanwhile, the Khmer world shrank. To the west, Ayutthaya grew powerful. To the east, Daiviet advanced. The once mighty empire became a smaller kingdom caught between rivals. Wars flared, borders shifted, and kings struggled to preserve independence. Diplomacy became as vital as armies. Gifts and tribute flowed outward, ensuring survival in a world of stronger neighbors. Yet even in decline, there was beauty. Imagine a late afternoon along the Mekong in the 16th century, boats drifting on golden water, monks chanting in a riverside monastery, children playing beneath palm trees. The grandeur of Angkor was gone, but life retained its quiet dignity. The Khmer endured not through monuments but through memory, faith, and the steady rhythm of the river. Travelers from Europe, arriving in these centuries, wrote of a kingdom modest compared to its past, but rich in culture. They saw wooden palaces, bustling markets, and people who still spoke proudly of their ancestors. They did not yet know that hidden in the jungle, vast temples still stood, waiting to astonish the world centuries later. As night falls on this chapter, imagine sitting by the Mekong, the current whispering softly against the banks. Fireflies rise from the reeds, and distant drums sound from a riverside village. The Khmer kingdom is smaller now, humbled but alive. Its people carry the memory of Angkor in their hearts. Even as they build new lives downstream, the empire has fallen, but the civilization endures like a river, always flowing, never still. Centuries after Angkor's decline, the jungle stood as both tomb and guardian. Roots wrapped around towers like stone serpents. Vines hung heavy across galleries where once kings had walked. The great barrays turned into lakes shimmering beneath lotus blooms, while walls carved with apsaras crumbled under monsoon rains. For villagers who lived nearby, these ruins were not abandoned. They were alive with memory. They were places of spirits, of ancestors, of stories whispered around evening fires. The Khmer kingdom, though diminished, endured along the Mekong. Its rulers presided over smaller courts. Its monks tended humble monasteries. Its people planted rice as their forebears had done for 1,000 years. Yet Angkor, the vast capital of old, slipped deeper into legend. Children heard tales of a city built by gods, of towers that pierced the clouds, of palaces where dancers never aged. The ruins became sacred not just as remnants of history, but as part of the living imagination of a people. Then came outsiders. In the 16th and 17th centuries, travelers from Europe and Asia stumbled upon Angkor's silent towers. Portuguese missionaries described temples vast as cities, walls adorned with carvings too intricate to believe. Later, French explorers in the 19th century brought drawings, photographs, and astonished words back to Europe. To the Western world, Angkor was a revelation, a lost city, though it had never been lost to the Khmer who lived in its shadow. The rediscovery ignited wonder. Scholars debated how such monuments could have been built in a jungle. Artists painted Angkor Wat as a vision of romance and mystery. Archaeologists arrived, clearing roots, measuring stones, restoring fallen towers. Slowly, Angkor returned not as a capital, but as a monument to human imagination. For the Khmer themselves, this recognition brought both pride and sorrow. Pride, because Angkor revealed to the world the greatness of their ancestors. Sorrow, because it reminded them of how far the kingdom had declined. Yet in that sorrow was resilience. The ruins became symbols of endurance, proof that even when empires fade, their spirit can whisper across centuries. Today, Angkor Wat adorns Cambodia's flag, its silhouette a reminder of a civilization that touched eternity. Pilgrims still light incense at its altars. Monks still chant beneath its towers. and travelers still arrive at dawn to watch the sun rise behind its lotus peaks. What was once the heart of empire is now the heart of memory, a bridge between past and present. Imagine standing at Angkor Wat at sunrise. The sky blushes pink and gold. The towers reflect upon the moat, and the chants of monks drift across the water. Birds stir in the jungle, and the air is thick with incense and dew. In that moment, the centuries collapse. You see not only the ruins, but the empire that built them, the people who dreamed them, and the future generations who still carry their echo. The Khmer Empire rose from rivers, shone through temples, and fell into twilight, yet it never truly disappeared. Its legacy lives in stone and story, in faith and memory, in the quiet resilience of a people who endure. To walk among the ruins is to walk through time itself, to hear whispers of an empire that once claimed eternity and, in a way, achieved it. As night falls on our journey, imagine the jungle once more. Fireflies drift like sparks among the trees. The ruins stand silent, yet alive. The empire is gone, but its echoes remain, carried on the wind, sung in the chants of monks, etched in the hearts of those who remember. The Khmer dreamed of eternity, and though their kingdom fell, their dream still lingers, gentle as a lullaby beneath the stars. Our journey began with rivers, the Mekong and the Tonlé Sap, whose waters gave life to the Khmer. It ends now, centuries later, with those same waters still flowing, steady as the passage of time itself. Empires rose and fell. Kings proclaimed themselves divine. Temples reached toward the heavens, and armies marched across jungles. Yet through it all, the rivers endured, silent witnesses to both triumph and decline. As you look back upon the Khmer Empire, what lingers is not only the names of rulers or the dates of battles, but the rhythm of human lives. A fisherman casting his net at dawn, a young girl lighting a clay lamp before a shrine, farmers bending over rice fields in the monsoon rain. These simple acts, repeated across centuries, built the foundation for the grandeur of Angkor Wat and Bayon. Behind every tower, every carving, every road, were countless hands whose stories remain unnamed. The fall of Angkor was not a sudden catastrophe, but a long, fading twilight. The jungle crept in. Roots embraced stone, and the world moved on. Yet the Khmer people did not vanish. They adapted, shifting their lives downstream, turning toward trade and faith, surviving even as their monuments became ruins. Civilization, after all, is not measured only in temples or crowns, but in the quiet persistence of a people who endure. Today, Angkor Wat stands not as a relic of defeat, but as a promise. It reminds us that all things pass: kingdoms, rulers, even stone. But it also whispers that human imagination leaves echoes that time cannot erase. The Khmer dreamed of eternity, and in their own way, they achieved it. So tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine the moonlight on Angkor's towers. The jungle hums, the waters of the lake reflect the stars, and somewhere in the silence you hear the faint echo of drums, of chants, of voices long gone, yet never lost. The Khmer Empire is no more, but its spirit drifts like a lullaby through the centuries, inviting us to listen, to remember, and to dream. Sleep now, and let the whisper of eternity carry you into rest.